Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the studios of Grafton TV, located at 26 Providence Road. And this is Meet the Candidate. I have a guest in the studio. His name is David Robbins. He's currently the chair of the planning board, and he is running for re-election. You have quite a bit to do with things in town, don't you?
I would say the planning board has quite a bit to do.
Yeah, but it's not just planning board. It's five different committees.
This is true. I wear several hats, as it happens. I've been on the Grafton Housing Authority now for some, I think, 6 or 7 years as the state appointee. The state gets to appoint one member of the Housing Authority. The voters of the town get to elect the other 4. I have the pleasure of serving with Jim Gallagher on that committee. Jim's been on that Housing Authority board for just about forever.
Right.
I also happen to chair the IT committee, an advisory committee to the town administrator on a lot of matters related to IT. I serve as the planning board representative on the Open Space and Recreation Committee, where we had recently completed an update to the Open Space and Recreation Plan, and the committee is now sort of coordinating and overseeing the implementation phase of that. It's nice to have a plan. It's nicer if you can actually carry out what the plan says you want to do. So that's our current mission on that.
So you're not afraid to help the town of Grafton, safe to say.
I think that's safe to say. I've also, kind of a short-term thing, I've been helping out the hazard mitigation plan update as a member of that committee. We're just sort of wrapping up that effort as well.
So how long have you lived in town?
We've lived in town since early 1986, so that would be about 36 years now.
Wow.
That's just about half my life.
Wow.
For whatever that's worth.
Are you born in Massachusetts, local folks, or?
Born and raised in Wisconsin.
Wow.
Sue and I both. We were born and raised in Wisconsin. Go Packers. We met in college at Madison, and we've moved around a bit. The Chicago area, Minneapolis area, Phoenix, Arizona, and then we came here. And we've been here for a long time now.
And what about your life experiences? What types of careers have you held?
Most of my career has been in research and development in the telecommunications computer industry. I retired from Verizon about 8 years ago, and done a lot of research and development for Verizon. And before the Verizon merger, I worked for GTE at the Research Laboratory here in Waltham, and before that, research and development in Arizona and Chicago.
So that would explain your involvement with the IT committee.
Yes, I would say I have been in IT in one way or another by various different names for practically my whole life.
So let's talk about planning board. Because I'm sure there's a lot of people in town that know you serve on planning board, but most people, including myself, have a hard time grasping what it is planning board does. How did you get involved in planning board? Walk us through the basics.
Yep.
I'll turn it over.
Well, I've been on the board for 12 years now. Signed up in 2010. There was actually an election where nobody ran for one of the seats on the planning board. I was right around that time that I was thinking of getting involved, and had I thought about it a couple of months earlier, I would have taken papers out for election. But as it happened, I thought about it a little bit late, but did want to get on. I've been involved in one aspect or another of land use planning and related things for a number of years. I was for a number of years back in the 90s, I was on the Conservation Commission, where we had a lot to do with development from a slightly different angle. So the planning board seemed like sort of a natural extension of what I'd done before. So in all that time, probably the most visible thing the planning board does is approves permits, special permits for various land uses. Like there's a number of things you can do without having to come to the planning board. You just get a building permit, like to build a typical house. But for most business type operations and some larger scale residential type operations or projects, you come to the planning board for a site plan approval and very often a special permit, where the board gets to review the plans, gets to kind of determine whether the development is appropriate for Grafton, whether it fits within the various criteria that the board uses to make its judgments, and ultimately to approve a project, typically with various conditions that the board says you've got to do it this way, you've got to do this or that, in order for it to be overall good for the town. So that's sort of the most visible thing that the board does. The board is also, as the name suggests, planning. The board also is tasked with some planning for the future of Grafton. We are just beginning to embark upon an update to the comprehensive master plan, which is it's something that we did about 20 years ago, last time we updated it, and it's time for it to be updated again, to take a look at, well, how has Grafton grown and developed over the last 20 years, and let's think about how we want Grafton to grow and develop going forward. Do we want to continue doing things much the way we have done, or do we maybe want to change the pattern of development a little bit to perhaps more easily balance out interests such as open space, recreation, housing, and municipal land use, that type of thing. So we are about to set forth and engage the community in talking about the way some people talk about master plans is, what does Grafton want to be when it grows up? Of course, we never really grow up. We grow and change all the time, but this is the planning aspect of what the planning board does. And often we spend so much of the time on the permitting that we don't have a lot of time to think more on planning. But we're tasked with doing both.
Okay. So the relationship that the planning board has with Mr. McGoldrick, the town planner, how does that work? Does he drive the bus, or does he? I think that's where many people kind of get fuzzy.
Yes, the town planner is staff support for the planning board. The town planner for the planning board, in relation to the planning board, the town planner does a lot of detail work, reviewing paperwork, writing up decisions for the planning board to review and edit and ultimately vote on. The town planner also does quite a few other planning-related activities that aren't really within the purview of the planning board. So the planning department has a number of responsibilities that the planning board does not. So there's sometimes we used to think, or at least I used to think of before I really understood it, that the town planner basically just works for the planning board, but his responsibilities actually encompass a rather larger territory than just what was within the purview of the planning board.
So if I understand you correctly, if I was to purchase, let's say, the old Burger King property, or where Pepperoni Express used to be, if I go in there to start a business, do I automatically come before the planning board, or is it a specific type of business? What triggers it?
It depends on the type of business. In the zoning bylaw, which governs this sort of thing, ultimately tells us what the planning board has to do and what the planning board doesn't do, there is a use table. And in that zone, it's a list of, these are the things that you can do basically by right. That all you have to do is get a building permit. And there are some types of businesses that fall within that category. Often that comes with a site plan review. So the planning board sees the site plan and looks at it and says, yeah, this makes sense. But the planning board really doesn't have the authority to deny a project that falls within just the site plan review. Then there are other types of business uses that require a special permit. That's sort of a full-blown procedure before the planning board. And there, with a special permit, the planning board does have the authority to deny a project if it determines that the project cannot be done in a way that's consistent with all of the parameters that are spelled out in the zoning law.
So is there a type of business that would be considered a non-starter for that piece of property, or?
Yes.
Okay, for example.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I don't know for sure, but if I remember right, that is in the community business zone. And so there are only certain businesses. Basically, it's intended for businesses of relatively modest size. So, for example, you wouldn't be able to put a warehouse there.
Okay.
To take an example that's at the front of a lot of people's minds these days.
Sure.
You wouldn't be able to put a factory there. There are quite a number of industrial scale or industrial type uses, industry or light industry, that would not be allowed to go there. So that zone is intended much more for smaller, more community-oriented businesses.
Okay, so if somebody wanted to open a hobby shop or a bicycle shop, those would be a little easier to negotiate through the system.
Yes, those likely would have very little trouble getting approved.
I see. Okay, very interesting. Very, very interesting. So, what does the planning board look for down the road, or what do you anticipate happening? We've already mentioned warehouses. Everybody whispers under their breath, Amazon.
Yes.
So what are you looking forward to? Maybe you're not looking forward to, but what are you looking at down the road?
Nothing really specific. I think, the town as a whole has, for years expressed a strong interest in what's often called economic development. And that is really expanding the commercial tax base so that in proportion to the overall town, the homeowners pay a somewhat smaller share of all the total property taxes. That can take a lot of forms. We've done some of that in the past. Centec Park up near Tufts has a lot of that's sort of an area that we targeted for commercial development.
Sure.
And there's some other currently vacant properties in that same area. As many of us may remember, that UPS bought a substantial chunk of land up there. We don't know if or when. I'm assuming they bought it for a reason. So it's probable that eventually that land will be developed one way or another. There's another parcel up there that was basically turned over to us by the state. It's around 30 or 40 acres. I don't remember the exact number. That we're looking for some development. But we're really, by and large, at least from a planning point of view, what specific types of businesses, that's awful hard to say, because it really depends on what the market is for commercial property, what the demand is for various kind of things. I can also mention Tufts Science Park, which was intended as a largely biotechnology research and development connected with Tufts. So far, the market hasn't been there to actually interest anybody in buying in and building there. Part of the problem there is they have to build, whereas as long as there's some empty space that's already built that they can move into, they're going to prefer that over building. But that's kind of a long-term vision for that particular area. Beyond that, who knows what the future brings. We're kind of dependent upon somebody being willing to invest the money in building a building and establishing an operation. I would venture to say that I would not look very favorably on an Amazon-style warehouse with tremendous amount of delivery trucks going in and out. But even that, under the right circumstances in the right place, might not be entirely inappropriate. But I don't think we see anything like that coming down the road yet. But as I said, who knows what the future brings.
Cross that bridge when you come to it. When you talk to people around town, when you attend events with your wife, do people have some basic misconceptions about planning board?
It's possible. I don't hear a lot of that. Of course, anytime a project comes before the board for review, we quite naturally and not surprisingly get folks who are worried about the impacts of that project, worried what it's going to do to their neighborhood, worried about things like traffic and the way things look, and don't we already have enough houses in Grafton? and these are all concerns that people do have and that we hear all the time. And sometimes I know folks wish that the planning board could do more to say do this or don't do that. But the planning board's authority and their ability to approve and disapprove is constrained by state law and by what the zoning bylaw allows us to take into consideration and what we can't. So, and I'll have to say I do recall having heard at least the occasional hope that maybe the planning board has more authority than they really do.
So people lose sight of the fact that you're following rules and guidelines set down by the Commonwealth. It's not just this board is freewheeling and doing what they want.
Yes, the board has discretion, but it is constrained.
Sure. Okay. So the same, when you're out in public and you talk to folks, what do they want you to watch out for? What do they want you to keep your eye on? Is it the same type of thing? Is it the warehouses, the Amazons, or are there other things that we may have overlooked?
I don't doubt that there are things that I'm not aware of. And sometimes the concerns only come up when a particular project is proposed or discussed. And sometimes with some types of projects, certainly with what a lot of us know as a 40B project, A lot of people, without realizing the bureaucracy involved, or the agencies involved, I should say. The planning board has no say over 40B projects. So those are reviewed by the Zoning Board of Appeals. The process for review is very similar to what we do on the planning board, but it's a different board that takes care of those. So, you know, in recent times, I have heard people ask about what the planning board's going to do about some of these recent 40B proposals, and the answer there is go talk to the zoning board. Now, if the planning board did review a project like that, the planning board might or might not come to the same conclusions that the zoning board does, but that's hypothetical.
Interesting. Very interesting. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to address the voters in town and make your pitch, and you're going to do that right over there.
Yes, well, thank you for the opportunity to speak on this, and even though nobody is opposing me at this point for planning board, as I said before, I've been on the board for 12 years. I look forward to serving on the board for at least another 3 years, and I would appreciate everybody giving me your support on election day. If anything, one of my major sort of missions going forward is the master plan update that I talked about. I think, you know, here's an opportunity for us to take a really good look at how Grafton has developed, particularly over the past 20 years. And I think if we look at that carefully, we might find that, well, we think maybe Grafton should go in a little bit different direction than we have been for the last 20 years, particularly in terms of housing development. And so I'm looking to engage the community in some good discussions about, you know, understanding where we are, where we've been, and the various paths we might have going forward. And that's one of the things that I'm most interested in working on over the next 3 years. Hopefully it won't take us more than 3 years to do that, ideally less. But if I'd had to say one of my overriding missions coming up is really that. Aside, of course, from all the usual plan review that we have to do as a board, try to do the best job we can on that for the community. But that's really, right now at the front of my mind is the opportunity to help the town update the master plan and set a direction for how we would like to see the town grow and develop over the next 10 or 20 years.
Nice job. Thank you so much, sir. Appreciate it for coming in.
Again, thank you for the opportunity.
You are welcome. My guest has been David Robbins of the Planning Board. He's up for re-election during this year's elections. On behalf of everyone here, the talented staff at Grafton TV, thank you for watching our program. This has been Meet the Candidate. I'm Bob DeToma.